And it's really important to understand what the Masechta is talking about and how it functions in order to be able to get a lot of details. Now, the difficulty really of this Masechta, one of the difficulties in Masechta is that you have to understand genealogy a lot, and especially a confusing a set of genealogy, because we're going to have many different relationships, and it's going to be important to have a good diagram book also when dealing with the Masechta. But for now, let's go into what it is. We are beginning Seder Nashim. Seder Nashim is not only a new Masechta Yevomot, but also Seder Nashim, the halachas. And the question really we should be asking, this is Rishonim ask it, that why are we starting with Masechta Yevomot? It seems a tragic, a sort of outlier to the halachas that we're dealing with. We think if we're dealing with with Nashim, we should start with Maseches Kiddushin, right? That should be the first Masechta. And there are various answers in Rishonim Tosfos itself. We're going to pick one because I think it focuses on what we're going to be looking at, and that is the all other Kiddushin is really an optional Kiddushin, even though there's a mitzvah to get married. But the Kiddushin, or the specific relationship, the specific marriage, is a choice. If this is a good match, I like this woman, I'm going to marry. I don't like a woman, it's not going to be a good marriage. This is the one mitzvah, really the only one where the Torah dictates the marriage. Ploni needs to marry Plonis. That is a fundamental difference. And so it starts with the one mitzvah. As it says also, there's multiple mitzvahs here, but it starts with the one that's an obligation. So let's look at the obligation in the pasuk. I had sent out a link, and I'll share the screen now with you. I had sent out the share, and now I'm going to find it. Let me find it 1 second. Sorry. When we see the pasuk in the Torah of what the Torah says is the mitzvah, and then analyze, hopefully understand what the mitzvah is. So the pasuk says, "Ki yeshvu achim yachdav." If brothers will sit together, that means they have to be alive together. Two brothers who are paternal brothers, because they have a yeshiva together, meaning they are inheriting together. Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, brothers sit together, umeis echad mehem, and one of them dies. Uvein ein lo, and he doesn't have a child, even a grandchild. Ein lo, the Gemara is going to say ayin alav, to see not only the child but the grandchild, great grandchild. They don't have any descendants that are alive. Lo sihiya eshes hames hachutza leishzar. The wife of the deceased shall not be to a outside man, meaning normally the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us at the beginning of Kiddushin, there are three ways to affect Kiddushin, B'kesef v'shtar b'biyah, and two ways to end a Kiddushin. The two ways of ending a Kiddushin are divorce, get, and Misa, death. And typically at the moment that of death, the Kiddushin is over. Kiddushin is a marriage between a man and a wife, and that's dissolved at the time that he dies. Yet over here, the Torah calls her Eshes Hames, the wife of the deceased. So she is still a wife, and therefore she cannot marry any other man. Rather, Yevama, her Yavam, the man who is going to be in place of the brother, Yavaleh will come to her, take it to her wife, and do Yibam. And this would reestablish, Pasuk Vav says, the reestablishment of the deceased brother's family. And if he does not want to marry her, and the Mishnah is going to tell us also, or if she doesn't want, then they go to the Beis Din, and she says, I don't want to establish the household, and they would call the elders, and we make chalitza. So two mitzvahs here in this pasuk, yibum or chalitza. I want to deal with what is the structure of how this mitzvah works. What's going on here? So the Torah tells us, and we see this later when we learn a concept of zika. Actually, I'm going to move back to the document to share that. I want to talk about this concept of zika. The Torah tells us that the Gemara, tells us. Let me move to source 3 if you have it, the document that I sent out the other day. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shomeres Yavam. So this term for this woman who is a widow and waiting for either Yibum or Chalitza is called Shomeres Yavam. She's waiting for Yibum. So this Shomeres Yavam, Shemesa, now she dies. Asur Be'ima. The Yavam is not allowed to marry a mother. Let's analyze the scenario. Reuven and Shimon, 2 brothers. Shimon dies, leaving his wife Rachel. Reuven, the brother of the deceased, has no relationship to Rachel, the widow. Yet the Torah says, yet Rabbi Yehuda says that if she were to die, he, the Yavam, or potential Yavam, may not marry any of her relatives. Meaning somehow that relationship is already established. So what we're seeing over here is that Reuven that gets married to Rachel, his marriage, if he doesn't have any children and he has a brother who is alive, immediately his marriage continues. His kiddushin is handed over, and this is the concept called here zika, yesh zika. Now everybody agrees there's a concept of zika. The question is how far to take it. But the concept is this. The Torah calls her Eshes Hames, the wife of the deceased. Wait, but we learned in kiddushin that the marriage ends at death. There's an exception. The marriage does not end in the case where the deceased had no offspring, and the wife and has a brother who's alive at the same time. So he sort of hands off his marriage. His kiddushin continues to the brother, and the brother inherits, as it were, in order to reestablish the household. So the function, the structure of what's happening in Yibum is the brother's marriage is handed off to the Yavam. He is now in a certain way married, and we'll see that it could be that 3 brothers, 4 brothers, 5 brothers. It's not just one, and yet that is handed off. That zika is a term of the passing on of the marriage of the deceased brother to one of the surviving brothers. And this is going to, understanding this structure is going to help us in some of the discussions that's going on. But it has to be that this brother that's inheriting the marriage, as it were, is alive. If the brother wasn't, if the brother, the Yavam, is not alive at the time that the first husband dies, the older brother dies, so he never was able to hand it over, and then that there is no mitzvah yibum in there. That's why the Torah says that it has to be that they were yeshvu achim yachdav, they lived together. Now, in truth, always we have a concept, we have an erva. The Torah has many prohibited marriages. Some, the easiest, are in a mitzvahs aseh. They're stated as a positive commandment. Kohen Gadol must marry someone who's never been married. So the Torah says, V'hu isha v'vsuleha yikach. So it says it in a positive. He shall take a woman that is a virgin, that is a maiden. So that's a mitzvah saseh. Then there are mitzvahs lo saseh. They're prohibited marriages that are not severe punishment, but nevertheless prohibited. So he may not marry, a Kohen Gadol may not marry an almana, a widow. A regular Kohen may not marry a divorcee, a gerusha, or chalutza, someone who had chalitza, which is the ending of Yibum. Other prohibitions in the Torah. So those are chayvei la'avin. Then we have a more severe level, which are the arayos, which are karisas. They are punishable by kares. Their soul is detached from its source, from Am Yisrael, from Hashem. That is a severe punishment. Now, generally we say in halacha that the level of kares, a chayve krisas, something that is punishable by kares, that level, kedushin is not tofes. Even if someone were to say, "Harei at mukudeshes li," try and attempt to make the kedushin, it will be ineffective. By chayve lavin, the halacha is that it is effective. If a Kohen says to a divorcee, "Harei at mukudeshes li," the kedushin takes effect. However, the Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that even there it does not take effect. But everybody agrees that Eshes Ach, the wife of one's brother, is a erva and a Torah prohibition. Here, the Torah makes it a mitzvah. The Torah says that even though generally this is an erva, this erva is suspended. Now, I say suspended, but really this is a discussion between Rashi and Tosfos. Rav Nachum Bertzovitz sees it in Rashi. Tosfos is more explicit. And here's the question. What happens to this Torah prohibition? We have a Torah prohibition that one may not marry his brother's wife. And yet, over here, the mitzvah is to marry. So Rashi says that a Torah Sharia really is the language of Rashi. We'll see that. But the concept is the Torah tells us a lot of prohibitions. The Torah told us a prohibition for Eshes Ach. When? If the brother had children, then, and is alive, or he's alive. But if he has no children and is deceased, then the prohibition does not exist. The Torah did not prohibit that case. That's the way Rashi interprets it. Tosfos interprets it as, no, the prohibition is still there. However, the Torah tells you a mitzvah to do. And we know as a concept, aseh dochalos aseh. A positive commandment will suspend the negative commandment. So we have a mitzvah aseh to do, and a mitzvah los aseh that is preventing me from doing it. I'm allowed to do the mitzvah even though it's going to be an avera. Classic case. If I have proper tzitzis with techelas, and it's proper techelas, so we know what techelas is. If we know what techelas is and I did it properly, so then I can even do it if I'm wearing wool strings, which is techelas, on my linen garment, which would be shatnez. But aseh, dochalos aseh, my positive commandment of putting on tzitzias on my four-corner garment will supersede the lav. But generally we say it only in a simple aseh and a simple lav. But if the lav sheyesh b'kares, a positive commandment cannot supersede it. So what's Tosfos talking about? So Tosfos explains, and the Rishonim explain this in depth, that here specifically, because the Torah gave me the mitzvah to do it in this manner, then it supersedes even in lav sheyesh b'kares. By tzitzis, I don't need to wear a linen garment. I can wear a wool garment and it won't be shatnez. It's possible to do the mitzvah. It's just circumstantial that the mitzvah is in a prohibition. So there, the positive commandment is only going to supersede a simple negative commandment. However, in the case of Eshes Ach, the mitzvah of Yibum, the wife of the brother, here the Torah specifically says, here's how to do the mitzvah. So even though the erva is still chai v'kayim, that prohibition is still there. The Torah tells me, I want you to do it, and the mitzvah supersedes that prohibition. Now, there's a difference, just to explain it. It's not, when we get to this Gemara in Daf Hashovua, we'll see more about this. But I want to show a Gemara in Daf Hashovua, which will help us clarify the distinction between Rashi and Tosfos, whether it's still a prohibition or not. So we have Gemara in Daf Hashovua. Barishona, at first, anybody doing the yibum, it did so with the intent of a mitzvah. Mitzvahs yibum kademas, and therefore, if you had a choice, do chalitza, do yibum, mitzvahs yibum came first. However, achshav, now, she'ein miskavlin l'shem mitzvah, it's not being done with the intent of a mitzvah. We say yibum is better. Now, who cares whether you're intending for a mitzvah or not? It is a mitzvah, and you're allowed to do it. So why would you not do it? So if we learn like Rashi, that's a good question. According to Rashi, Rashi says the mitzvah doesn't exist, the prohibition doesn't exist, so who cares? However, according to Tosfos, it makes a lot of sense. Tosfos says the prohibition is still there. She is an erva to you. Just the Torah says, I want you to do it anyhow. The mitzvah is to do it. Wait, but if you're not intending for a mitzvah, then you have an erva, and that's not okay. So Abba Shaul says it is close to creating a mamzer by doing this in that Gemara there. So I'm not going to get into the depth of that Gemara, but the concept is that we see that there's a discussion here between Rashi and Tosfos whether the prohibition is still existent. Tosfos says it's just that the Torah says I want the positive commandment to supersede it, or as Rashi states it, the prohibition actually no longer exists. The Losase is suspended. She is not an erva. So we have the structure. The structure, what happens is when Reuven dies, Shimon, his brother, inherits the marriage to a certain extent. He has to consummate it, but he inherits the marriage to a certain extent, and therefore the Yevama may not marry anyone else because she is still bound to the first marriage. And when Shimon completes that marriage, he is taking over or reestablishing or continuing Reuven's marriage. And as such, the establishment of Reuven's family will continue because that original Kiddushin is there. This will explain to us why a Yavam doesn't have to do Kiddushin. Because it's already, and we know in Torah there's two steps. One is Kiddushin, second is Chuppah. There's two steps to it, betrothal and marriage. And a Yavam skips the betrothal. There is a Derabanan, we'll see later in the Gemara, it's called Mamar, a rabbinic enactment, the Derabanan to make a Kiddushin. But there is no Kiddushin. The answer is, the reason is because Reuven's Kiddushin continues and is inherited by Shimon. That's called the Zika. He's inheriting the original Kiddushin. So that's the structure of what's happening. And therefore, we say that the mitzvah is either going to supersede the prohibition or the prohibition doesn't exist. And this prohibition is an erva, a kares erva, generally, of marrying a brother's wife. Over here, it's inherited. You're taking over that marriage, and so there's no prohibition. Our Mishnah deals with what happens if that woman is actually prohibited to one of the Yavams. So let's go to the case the way Rashi gives it. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, three brothers. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and Shimon marries Reuven's daughter. This is a very unique case because, as we know, the Torah has a list of arayas, and the Torah prohibits us from marrying an aunt, but permits us to marry a niece. Why and what the logic is of no consequence right now. But the point is that the Torah says one may marry their brother's daughter. So Reuven has a daughter, we call her Rachel, and Shimon marries Rachel. That's fine. I'm going to share a document that has a little diagram that'll help us out. Hold a moment. Okay, so now Shimon, can you all see that the document?
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. Let me just move you guys over so I can see it too. There. So Reuven has a daughter. In this diagram, it's called Sarah. So we'll go. Reuven's got a daughter, Sarah. Shimon marries Sarah. Now, when Shimon dies, right? In the next diagram here, right? Shimon's, grayed out. He's passed away. Sarah would be Reuven's Shomeres Yevoma. Obviously, that's prohibited because it's his daughter. So that's an Isser Erva. So it cannot pass to Reuven. Shimon's marriage cannot pass to Reuven. What did we say the structure is? Shimon made Kiddushin to Sarah. Now, his Kiddushin goes over to the Yavam. Obviously, his Kiddushin cannot pass to Reuven because that's not a possible Kiddushin. So it can only pass to Levi, the other brother. What about the tzara? If Shimon's married to two wives, that's called a tzara. Well, it literally means one who narrows, who competes and narrows the space. So Rivka is the tzara. Rivka is not prohibited to Reuven, but it is. If Shimon's marriage cannot be passed to Reuven, not only the erva, but even the tzaras erva, that's the term, tzaras erva, the other wife in the marriage of an erva cannot be passed to Reuven. So only Levi is going to be able to do yibum in this place. And if there's only one brother, then no yibum is able to be made. The marriage cannot be passed on. So that's the beginning structure of our Mishnah. It can't be passed on. Then we're going to get to the next step. The next step is tzaras erva, tzaras tzara. So here's what happens. The marriage gets passed to Levi, and Levi can choose whether to do yibum to Sarah or to Rivka, and only one. Because once he's taken over one marriage, that's enough to establish the household of his brother. He doesn't have to take both. So, and then the other one is going to be prohibited to him as his brother's wife. So this suspension, according to Rashi, or the superseding of the mitzvah, according to Tosas, either way is only going to happen to one of them. He chooses Rivka over Sarah. Sarah is prohibited to Reuven. Rivka is now prohibited to Reuven, but never was. Now Levi, in establishing the mitzvah, marries the tzara. He does yibum. Now Levi dies as well. But Levi had two wives. He had a wife, Rivka, which he did as a mitzvah to establish his brother's house, but he was already married to Rachel. Now, Rachel was never in a shared marriage with Reuven's daughter, Sarah. Rachel was never in a marriage with Reuven's daughter. So perhaps Rachel is allowed to have yibum with Reuven. The answer is no. That's a tzaras tzara. And we learn that from a special drasha, litzror. The Torah says you cannot take your brother's wife, you cannot take an erva litzror to bring them into a bound marriage. That means even not the erva itself, but even the tzara of the erva is also going to be prohibited. Now, in order to understand this, I'm going to ask a question from Rabbi Kiva Eger just to demonstrate the depth of what really is going on here. And hopefully that'll be an abridged version of our introduction, and it'll help us understand the concepts. Reuven is the oldest brother. He has a daughter, Sarah. Since he has a daughter, Sarah, who is married to his brother, Shimon, even the sister wife, even the tzara, Rivka, is prohibited to him in Yibum. Only Levi is allowed to do Yibum, and Levi did. But he didn't do Yibum to Reuven's daughter. He did Yibum to Rivka, the tzara. But let's analyze this. What's the status of Rivka to Reuven? Rivka is prohibited to Reuven as an erva, as a simple erva. You know which erva? His brother's wife. It's his brother Shimon's wife. Now, we typically would have said that erva was suspended on account of there's a mitzvah. But since he didn't have a mitzvah to do, because the Torah prohibited the yibum to Reuven, Rivka cannot be transferred to Reuven, and therefore, even though she herself is not the erva, so there's no mitzvah. If there's no mitzvah, she's back to her original state of being an erva, because every brother's wife is an erva unless there is a mitzvah. So Rivka, anyhow, is simply an erva. So Rachel is not a tsaras tsara, as the Mishnah explains it, but is really simply a tsaras erva. It's simply the tsara, the sister wife of Rivka, who is an erva. Which erva? The brother's wife, the sister-in-law of Reuven. That's what Rabbi takes question in order to ask, why do I need a special drasha? I'm only bringing this up, even though this is a really deep question. I want to demonstrate that really we have an erva. Reuven is prohibited to Shimon's wife, Sarah, as his daughter, but also Rivka as his brother's wife. It's only that it's either suspended or the mitzvah supersedes it in the case of where there's a mitzvah. And then in that case, Shimon's marriage is going to be transferred to him. But if that transfer can't happen because the mitzvah does not apply, well, then she remains in the erva state, a prohibited state. And therefore, even if Levi did yibum, which he was allowed to do, and not to Reuven's daughter, but rather to the sister wife, to the tzara, nevertheless, the marriage of Levi cannot pass to Reuven because there's an erva in that marriage. And if there's an erva and it can't pass, so none of it's going to go over to Reuven. So to close it up and to go through this again quickly. The Torah tells us if somebody dies, typically their marriage is over. If it's a case of where that man has no children, no descendants, his marriage will continue to a brother that's alive at the time. If there was no brother alive at the time, or even if there was a brother and there was a new one born later, that brother is not included. The brother that's alive will inherit the first, some level of kiddushin, that's called zika, and they have a mitzvah to consummate that. A mitzvah in order to reestablish the household of the deceased brother, and that will happen by reestablishing, by the marriage and having children, and the continuing, as it were, the kiddushin. And that's why the Torah refers to her as Eshes Hames, the wife of the deceased. Meaning, even though he's dead, her marriage, her kiddushin to him, still alive. And this will either supersede, the mitzvah will either supersede the prohibition, or it suspends the prohibition. There is no prohibition. However, if there's a second, if there's an erva there, meaning if this woman happens to be the brother's daughter or the brother's other relative, as we'll see, any other of the 15 relatives that the Mishnah is going to list will not pass. The Kiddushin cannot pass. The means is no mitzvah yibum. It'll exempt her of yibum. It'll also exempt her of chalitza. Because either one of the mitzvahs are going to be exempt. None of the Kiddushin can be passed. And not only for the daughter, but also for the sister wife, for the tzara. Because Shimon's marriage cannot be passed to Reuven. And if Levi does yibum, well, he's allowed to, and now he dies, also it's not going to be able to be passed. Not only the tzara, which is now prohibited to Reuven, but also the tzaras tzara is also going to be prohibited to Reuven, and that marriage can't be passed. That's the starting point of this Masechta. Any questions? Okay, so that means that hopefully the concept, at least, of this yibum, of the passing of the kiddushin, and of the erva, the prohibition where it can't be passed because the surviving brother is not allowed to marry. And therefore, not only that erva, but even a sister wife in that marriage. And not only that, but if that brother, another brother, did do yibum to the sister wife, to the tzara, and he had two wives and he died without childless, he also cannot pass on the kiddushin because there's a tzara in that marriage. Hopefully that will illuminate and help the ability to start the Masechta, give us the concepts of yibum, of zika, of chalitza. Again, yibum being the mitzvah to continue the marriage. Zika, the concept of the passing of the kiddushin from the deceased brother to the second. Chalitza, ending it. Tzara, the erva, the prohibited relationship to the surviving brother, which would mean that Ibum is not possible. The Tzara, the second wife in that marriage, who also is going to be exempt of the mitzvah and therefore retains her status as an erva. And the Tzara, which is if Levi made Yibum, that there, even the sister wife there would not be able to be passed to Reuven, like in this diagram. The diagrams I just showed you are also in the WhatsApp group, so you can look at that. And hopefully this will help you start the Masechta, learn it with your Chavrusa, and on Wednesday night we'll give a shir to open this up and continue the conversation.